It's the Get Published radio show. And here's your host, Gerald Everett Jones, the guy who has the answers because, well, he's made all the mistakes himself.
On today's show, our topic is memoir. So if you're tempted to press the send button on that steamy diary of yours, this show's for you.
I think memoirs are definitely about learning from your mistakes. I know I've made some huge ones. I just can't remember a lot of them.
Well, now, is that because it was like morning after the party, or you just plain refused to, cop to them?
I'm going to go with both. College was an interesting time.
Well, I'm not ready to publish mine, but I've ghosted and I've edited some for people, and I do have some opinions. Cheyenne, what do you think might motivate somebody to publish a memoir?
I think people have a lot of different reasons for wanting to tell their story. Definitely difference in experience from just the normal everyday life. Some way their life is sort of outstanding. Or it could be maybe to leave a legacy behind. They want to tell how they made it so far in whatever their career is, or maybe made it through some sort of tribulation. So I think it depends.
Yes, I have seen the idea of life challenges, and especially people who felt like they have some compelling lessons learned, or maybe they made a spiritual discovery, or they feel as though they came back from something. And, in the show, often you as our millennial and Tom, who isn't here today, but as our senior member, the idea of being, say, semi-retired and finally wanting to get something off your chest, yes, I think that's a very strong motivation, among, his and my generation. I think for you guys that are maybe just out of school, or maybe you've just bounced back from the first job that you hate, or, that there may be the anecdote, the short story, I used to call it peeing on your own shoes, the story of the drunken party and the failed pickup, or the mistakes, again, the lessons learned, the mistakes that you made as a first-time fraternity or sorority pledge.
Yeah, I think memoirs can definitely, in certain ways, bleed into the category of self-help, kind of helping people to avoid mistakes maybe you've made in your life.
Well, or confession if you're not a Catholic. You've got to have another means of,
you said, getting stuff off your chest.
Exactly. Yeah. Get it off your chest. And actually, that leads me to the point, I think there's another generalization I can make about looking at people's manuscripts that they say, this is what I want to publish, is very often they've got this desire to express. They know that they've got a story. They know they've got something in their gut. Maybe they've been chomping on it for decades, okay? And maybe people have told them, you should write that. Well, the thing is that very often they may think that they're going to write a novel, but in fact, the novel comes across as a first-person memoir. In other words, they really can't get too far. The rock isn't falling too far, from them. I think that their main character is almost always themselves. And even among famous novelists, you got Philip Roth, people like that, who their first novel was something that Goodbye Columbus out of their life.
It's easiest, obviously, for people to write about themselves because they have all of their personal experiences to draw upon. But that could possibly come from a place of thinking, my story, the way it actually happened, isn't good enough, or it's not interesting enough, or whatever they feel would keep them from really writing a true memoir and kind of then flipping it into a fictional version of their lives.
And that's something that happens in screenwriting groups in Hollywood. We talk about this all the time. This show isn't a lot about Hollywood because we don't want to really open that door. But one of the things about Hollywood is a studio executive will tell you, if we buy the rights to the book, the only thing we're really committed to is the title. Yeah. Okay, it's just an excuse to tell a story. The expression they use is we want to take the audience on the ride they want to go on.
Yeah.
So if we have to change the king's sexual persuasion, or if we so we can team him up with a star, or we have to rewrite history, we'll do it to make a good story. But of course, if you're going to come across and represent this to the public as a memoir,
that's where it gets tricky.
It's nonfiction, isn't it? So we go back to your journalism 101 training of how can I make this colorful, engaging, but it actually has to kind of be the truth, or else I'm going to call it a nonfiction novel. Now, nonfiction novel, we're right there on the borderline, right?
Yeah, I mean, you can get into a lot of liability issues if you're using someone's likeness in that way.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you think, well, it's my story. I'm giving myself permission, and my parents are gone, and I don't speak to my cousins. And the problem is, if you, even as a relatively minor character, if you're talking about your next door neighbor, okay, yes, you change the name. Problem is, if that character, and we're not lawyers, but we play those on TV, right?
Sometimes.
We expressly reserve the right to play on TV. If that neighbor can recognize themselves, even in disguised form, and their neighbors, your friends, can recognize them.
Yes, yeah.
You have got a big problem. Now, stories that I've adapted from life stories for movies, for, let's say, a cable movie, they get away with, the key is when you see based on a true story versus inspired by a true story.
Huge difference.
Huge difference. And very often they will let you know that in their disclaimer that yes, it's been based on facts, but we made everything up.
Yeah,
okay,
the characters
which is actually
are not real
true.
people. They're not meant to represent. They have that little,
and so
like
what
you said,
do,
disclaimer for sure to kind of get them off the hook if someone does come forward and say, hey, that's me, and I don't like the way that you played me.
And so what you do, or what's done every day in Hollywood to get things through studio legal, is not only do you change the name, but you may change the sex, the ethnicity, the age, the mannerisms. If they're, Chinese, suddenly you give them a Southern American accent instead.
Yeah. And the more distance you put between the real person and the character, the less likely you are to have to deal with that big legal
an
trouble.
opponent is an opponent.
Yeah.
Okay.
Doesn't matter what they look like.
And usually the characters that are unflattering are, of course, in your story, they're opponents. They're people that you're struggling against. So, I think we're really starting to mine this. When we come back from the break, I think we want to talk about not only the idea of adaptation, but I think we also want to talk about, again, this whole idea of fact-checking and self-expression and even fake news. So we'll be back right after this.
Great writers are not born great. They're nurtured, coached, corrected, and prompted. Let Roberta Edgar and Flo Selfman, the experts at Word a la Mode, help. Whether you're just beginning your book or you're ready to publish. That's wordsalamode.com. The last word on words. Runke Productions, the audio magicians, can take your radio shows, podcasts, audiobooks, and ads from the streets of New York to the outer reaches of the galaxy.
I think we need more echo at the end of that.
Now look, visit us at runkeeproductions.com.
I still think we need more cowbell.
A professionally designed cover is the best marketing tool your book can have. It immediately grabs your potential readers and holds their attention. It communicates the essence of your book at a glance, whether viewed 1-inch high online or full-size in a bookstore. But a good interior design is also needed. It's a joy to readers and a signal to booksellers that your book is not an amateur effort. Ideas to Images is a book design and production firm that has been helping authors for 20 years to take their precious publishing projects up to the next level. If you want your book to command the attention of readers and booksellers, call Gary Palmatier at Ideas to Images at 707-542-4301 or email Gary at ideas@sonic.net. That's ideas@sonic.net. Ideas to Images. The name says it all.
GetPublishedRadio.com is your portal to a wealth of resources for realizing your fondest dreams of self-expression. On our For Authors pages, you'll find a directory of editors and support services. You'll also find links just for publishers and for promoters. And if you want our help with any part of it, you'll find a Request for Services form. It's all there. What are you waiting for? At GetPublishedRadio.com.
When you contact our advertisers, be sure to mention the promo code RADIO. Welcome back to Get Published, where it's, all about getting published.
The topic of today's show is memoir, and I've been talking with my razor-sharp co-host, Cheyenne Cockrell, about the difference between adapting a real story and just making stuff up, which, I think motivation for a memoir might be to express a story, but maybe what's in you is a short story and not, your own thing. But Cheyenne, let me ask you, from the standpoint of someone who's got a manuscript to develop or a project at whatever stage, maybe you could weigh in on the difference between developmental editing and ghostwriting?
Yeah, developmental editing, I feel like, is for someone who has a very, at least in their mind, a clearer idea about what they want. They're going to do most of the work and have someone kind of help fill in the gaps where they fall short and kind of guide them through the process.
Talk it into a recorder or be interviewed and have it transcribed.
Yeah, so someone kind of works for you, but you're kind of doing most of the work, whereas a ghostwriter is going to come in and just really get a lot more done for you. Just essentially take your story and put it in their words.
Yeah. I don't think it's either or, of course. You may start out, the times that I've started out thinking that I've got a developmental editing assignment, I may get in there and I find that there's actually huge chunks that have to be written from scratch and with then approved by or vetted by, the author or the subject. But often I think also, and I find this in nonfiction writing, and I'm wondering whether this has occurred to you as a journalist, like in writing news stories, when I'm doing expository writing and I'm explaining, let's say, a technical process, and I've got the basis of the article from a subject matter expert. I've got it from, somebody who really knows their stuff. The problem is I'm going to come across information gaps where they talk about step 1 and they talk about step 2, but it isn't obvious how they got from here to there. And so to be complete and to be thorough and for the reader to kind of keep up with you, it could be that everybody who's a rocket scientist knows how to get from step 1 to step 2. Okay, it goes without saying, literally. If you're writing to a general audience or you're writing to a customer who they want to use it, but they're not capable of inventing it, if you don't understand it and there's nobody there to tell you and you're on a deadline, you basically make stuff up. Now, that's not to say that you're distorting or creating alternative facts. But what I say to the people who are going to review it is, read me carefully, fact check in your own mind whether, if you haven't seen this before, is it true? Did I get it right? Okay? Or did I maybe misinterpret it?
I think as long as you're taking that step to then, even if you write it and then fact check it after, then it's okay. As long as you're not just, sending it to print with your, I think this is right.
But the problem is, and not to brag, is when I make that stuff up, it sounds so good. They go, I didn't know that.
Yeah, you definitely want to make sure what you're putting in is factual, but in a way for your readers to really be able to comprehend it, especially with something like a technical process. You want to make sure you have the correct steps there. But like you said, if you have that gap of information, you're going to need someone that's in that field to give you kind of layman's term version to help your readers really be able to comprehend what's happening.
And we may think, our listeners may think at this point, we've really gotten far afield from memoir.
Oh, no,
but actually, I want to relate that a little bit more strongly, because another pitfall that I've seen with manuscripts that come in from people who are intending to write memoir. I'll give you an example. A woman came to me who is an artistic instructor, okay? She instructs in, I won't say in particular what part of the arts, but she said, here's my memoir. Well, as I read it, I saw that it was 2 books jammed together. It was her autobiography where she was talking about her career as a star, as a performer, the rocky road, how she got her way to the top, as a discriminated against, all that kind of stuff. But embedded in this was an instructional course in how to do what her technique was.
Yeah, I would definitely, I think if I came across the same thing, recommend doing 2 separate books.
There are 2 books.
You don't want to jam that together because then you really lose one over the other.
Well, but the other thing is the listeners or the readers who want to buy a how-to book do not want to listen to you gasp about what a great star you
Definitely
are.
A different audience, yes.
They may want want some concise statements of, I tried this, it doesn't work. Okay, but I don't need a chapter describing the performance where I went on stage and I tripped over my, whatever, all that. That's interesting for a biography. But when I think of a self-help book, when I think of how-to, I'm actually thinking of those books with the numbered steps and the diagrams and the call-outs, because that book is not going to be read from cover to cover.
No. They're going to go to the chapter that they need at the time. It's not going to be...
It's a manual.
As cohesive, yeah.
like a help system page, okay? And that's the thing that eliminated computer books, was really good interactive help systems.
Yeah.
And, I was a part of that. But then also, Cheyenne, how about pain and suffering? I mean, it seems like memoir often wants to go there.
Yeah, and I mean, that's where you get the kind of dichotomy of, do people want to read about someone's success in life, or do people want to read about people's downfalls? I mean, I think you can learn from both.
And are you willing to explore that as an author? Are you willing to go there?
Are you ready to go to those dark places within yourself when you've been at your lowest times? Because that, I think, is so important, especially in kind of like the lesson learned type memoir, for the reader to really be able to identify with the author, knowing that, the author was in this just low point in their lives, and not thinking, this person was just kind of a success from the start. Just the, what's the word I'm looking for? The
challenge? Just
the connection that the reader and the author make at that point.
Empathetic
yes.
vibe, the engagement, which of course, engagement is what we seek on social media. But, when we come back from the break, there is actually one anecdote about something that happened to me that I want to share with you, because I do think that this idea of pain and suffering and where you go in your soul when you write is really important. So we'll be back right after this.
GetPublishedRadio.com is your portal to a wealth of resources for realizing your fondest dreams of self-expression. On our For Authors pages, you'll find a directory of editors and support services. You'll also find links just for publishers and for promoters. And if you want our help with any part of it, you'll find a Request for Services form. It's all there. What are you waiting for? At GetPublishedRadio.com.
Wouldn't you love it if you could just write? If you didn't have to eat, walk the dog, pick up the kids, meet your therapist, sleep with your spouse, and maintain your website? You might need a clone to manage the rest of your life, but have eMarketed set you up with a professional website and take care of all the online activities you're supposed to be responsible for. Much better. For author management services, call them. No, write them today. Writers@eMarketed.com. Is it time to call an editor? Every writer can be helped by a fresh set of eyes reviewing your book pages. Whether it's a final polish, overall feedback, or support for publishing, think of editor and book coach Robin Quinn. She specializes in working with new authors. Call 310-838-7098 or visit her website, www.writingandediting.biz. That's 310-838-7098, Robin Quinn.
How much better would your portrait look if you felt comfortable in front of the camera, coached by a photographer who's been an international model? Gabriella Mouton works with you to bring out your best with the most flattering lighting setups. Her studio is located in the heart of Hollywood. For dazzling portraits in fashion, commercial, theatrical, or glamour, call 323-823-1238 or visit GabriellaMouton.com. That's Gabriella, Muttone.com.
When you contact our advertisers, be sure to mention the promo code RADIO. Welcome back to Get Published, where it's, well, all about getting published.
So, Gerald, before the break, you said you had a nice little anecdote about suffering. You want to lay that on us?
Well, I don't know about how nice and about suffering, but I had this writing coach, okay, and I've had a bunch, but this particularly expensive writing coach, whom I won't name, and I had asked him, I had written nonfiction for years and years, business and computer books. I was real familiar with that. And I was used to writing to outlines. I was used to writing sample chapters, proposals, marketing analyses. And so I asked him, I said, my fiction, I'm having more difficulty, and I'd written a couple of fiction, but I'm having more difficulty marketing my fiction or really understanding the process. And he said, well, Gerald, you just don't understand your audience. If you knew who your audience was and what kind of characters they wanted to see, you just give it to them. In the business world, you know what that is. And so he told me to do a survey of my fans that I could reach and, my peers, and ask shamelessly, what do you think? And the odd thing was, I found out that his advice in that instance was 180 degrees wrong. Because when I started thinking about it, I realized in the creative area, fiction, creative, who might be models? Mozart, Picasso, Wagner. These were tormented souls. These were not people who cared a whit about what their audience thought. Okay? I mean, Mozart, totally crazy. Okay?
They just made
bipolar
what they felt.
Personality. Well, what I finally got to was they had the courage to go deep. They were so self-obsessed, so egocentric, Picasso, oh my God, that they were only focused on their own feelings and emotions, and they went places that other people are afraid to go. And that in itself is incredibly difficult, but you're not going to even begin to go there if you don't realize it's necessary.
I think that's a great point. Like you said, if they weren't so narcissistic, they wouldn't have gone that deep.
Well, and it informs memoir.
Yeah.
If and we've had coaches advise us, don't narrate, storytell, scene set. And I think that's fine. But then again, spoken word, things like that are kind of narrative. They're kind of the grandpa telling you how it was.
And I think if you're narrating in a proper way, you are setting the scene and storytelling. It just might not have the same amount of, dialogue or interaction between characters, but you are still bringing the reader into that moment when you are narrating.
There's a scene and there are episodes within your story, and but I don't think that the hard distinction between, show, don't tell, that is kind of a movie distinction.
Yeah.
And it's true that audiences are oriented that way. I think that the spectrum is broader than that. At least I would hope that there is experimentation a lot of different ways.
No one correct way to write a book, obviously.
Well,
there's so many different...
Tell Homer,
yeah.
Okay? I mean, that was all oral. There was a lot of narration there.
Yeah.
And the Greeks did this, and they went there, but then again, he does talk about the arguments that the troops would have among themselves, and the fearsome monsters that they would react to, and all like that. So
yeah, I think it has a healthy mix of both, and that's kind of what's important to keep in mind. You don't want it to be just completely you telling the readers what's going on and never really bringing them into a scene.
It's an art and it has no rules.
Yeah. Like I said, there's no one right way to do it.
If we leave you with anything, that should be it.
Yeah. You have to play with it. You have to find what makes your story unique or interesting. Hopefully it resonates with people.
We had some input also from coaches telling us about people wanting to express and wanting to kind of just tell it like it was, narration. The idea of, and I think it was screenwriter coach Robert McKee said that a scene it starts with a disagreement about an action and ends with an argument about values. And I don't think all scenes are necessarily that, but I think if you write scenes that way, you won't go too far wrong.
Yeah. And I think that kind of goes into the territory we were talking about earlier, where at what point do you realize, all right, I'm going to need to embellish this a little more? When do you want to go into the territory of fiction versus nonfiction? So just being able to figure out, is your conflict or whatever the core of your story is enough, I guess?
Well, fictionalized nonfiction, yes. And it's the question of plausibility, reality, what they, in the old-fashioned term, was verisimilitude. Would a reader buy into the world that you're creating?
Yeah.
And that was one of the things we were talking about with War Memoir, is that the detail, the smells, the sights, the different terrain, the culture of the people, all that, to the extent that you can bring that detail up, it takes the reader someplace that they couldn't possibly go.
It's the devil's in the details, as they like to say, yeah. It creates a whole new experience for the reader if you're able to touch on every sense that they have, even if they're just reading words on a paper. If they're able to understand, like you said, the smells and the sights and the touch of wherever the author is trying to take them, it brings the book to a whole new level.
And we're flirting with that devil every day. And that's our show. Get Published is all about self-publishing and self-expression. And that getting published and the ease of getting published these days is really all about exercising the First Amendment in this free society of ours. What we need these days are more ideas. Even though we're deluged with information, we need more good ideas. And we need debate about those ideas. Book-length debate, not just snippets that are posted on social media, not just selfies and cute pictures of your pets, the things that you really think. And remember, because in self-publishing there are no gatekeepers out there, that is the good news and that is the bad news. So hire some good help. Perhaps you found that here. You may find it on the website, whatever you're looking for, whether it's an editor or a book designer or somebody help you promote. But hire good help, get good advice, and by all means, please get published.
The Get Published radio show with Gerald Everett Jones is produced by Runkey Productions. Our producer is Lori Marple and your announcer is Bill Navarro. Music by Jason Shaw. You'll find links to support services on our website, getpublishradio.com. So whether you're an author, a publisher, or a self-promoter, get help at getpublishradio.com. And thanks for listening. Join your host, Gerald Everett Jones, for Get Published Radio, Sundays at noon on Hella 87.7.